These days, there are a lot of independent small pattern companies available for sewists to explore, including me. But this isn't a new thing. Vintage patterns were available from many other companies than the ones you are most familiar with: Butterick, McCall's, Simplicity, and Vogue. I looked through my pattern collection and was surprised at how many other pattern companies I have. In some cases, I only have one example and many choices for others. Let's take a look at some of the other options for vintage patterns. The largest company, and the one that I have the most patterns from, is Advance. Advance patterns were sold by J.C. Penney from 1933 until 1966. Advance patterns were very similar to Butterick patterns. Here's a fun play suit with a blouse, shorts, and a skirt from 1934. And this wonderful pantsuit from 1942 is one of my favorites. Here's an interesting wrap blouse from 1957 that can be worn back to front or front to back. And a 1960s dress with a great button detail. In the first half of the 20th century, there were not many local stores where sewists, especially in rural areas, could buy sewing patterns. Many magazines and newspapers offered mail-order patterns, which were very popular. These had no separate envelope, and the instructions were wrapped around the pieces. Ann Adams was one of the better-known brands. Here's a button-up dress from the late 1940s and an A-line dress from the 1960s. Here's a mail-order pattern from Capper Publications from the 1920s. The mailing envelope features a blurb on how the pattern was created, and it has a separate instruction sheet. Here's another 1920s pattern from Cut Easy. These patterns were issued by Ladies' Home Journal and were the first patterns with multiple sizes in one package. This one includes sizes 14, 16, and 18. It's also a printed pattern. Dewberry patterns were manufactured exclusively for Woolworths by Simplicity from 1931 to 1946. Here are two examples from the 1930s. The patterns were unprinted and had instruction sheets, but the envelope was considerably smaller than the standard size. Excella patterns were issued in the 1920s and 30s until the company was bought by Simplicity in 1935. This dress with an asymmetrical front panel is one of my favorites. The instructions are printed on the outside of the envelope. Hollywood patterns were created by Condé Nast in 1932 and ceased production after the Second World War. The pattern envelopes were often adorned with images of Hollywood stars. Hollywood 701 from 1941 was inspired by Brenda Marshall, who starred in Highway West. Hollywood 1806 from the late 1930s is a fitted blouse with puff sleeves inspired by Gail Page in Family Reunion. Here is another pattern from 1943 featuring Merle Oberon on the cover. I really like this embellished jumper. Marion Martin is another well-known mail-order name. Often, the same patterns were issued under Ann Adams or Marion Martin with a different number. This nightgown pattern from 1955 features a baby doll and long gown option. This dress with a gathered bodice from 1954 also has a shaped bolero jacket with cuffs. There are also many generic mail-order patterns available from local newspapers. This dress and jacket from the 1940s has a shaped button closure on the dress front. These two dresses from the late 1950s each have an interesting button detail on the collar. And this dress from 1966 has a great pleat detail. This wraps up the first half of my dive into these lesser-known pattern companies. Many of the patterns from these manufacturers are still available at reasonable prices, so keep your eye out for a deal. Generally, there is not much difference from the more familiar patterns of the time. Next week, I'll finish out my list of pattern companies with some of my New York, Polynesian, and pictorial review patterns. They have great details, and I love being able to share something new. I put out videos every Tuesday, so make sure to subscribe to be notified when the next post comes out. Let me know if you have questions about working with vintage patterns below, and be sure to like if you found this helpful. Thank you.